What was the old saying? I'll move to my left, you move to your right, thus creating the mirror effect back in the day?
And what we won't do is stand too close together and have the light blind everybody.
Yeah. But based on popular demand, the John and Jim show is back. More for John than me. Mine's morbid curiosity. His is the other way around. But there used to be a saying in the Ranger Regiment that you have to have a balance of smart Rangers and strong Rangers. John is obviously the smart Ranger, and I used to be a strong Ranger. Now that I'm almost 54, I don't think I even have that. But we're excited to be back here this afternoon to take this down just a little bit lower than what Pete did, and kind of talked about the broad brushes of the tactical network strategy and where we're going with the mission command strategy. And then, like I talked about this morning, we've got some colonels that are going to give you the details and go really super deep on each one of the 4 lines of effort.
Do you want to talk about our relationship and how it works inside TRADOC?
It does. And this was actually John's idea when we both first kind of came into the job about the same time. He came up here to Fort Leavenworth, and he said, this is really kind of a 3 and 6 relationship, and that's kind of how he and I have viewed this since the beginning, and it's worked out really, really well. But if you kind of bring up the first chart and what kind of alludes to this, General Lundy, our boss, is a big proponent of force modernization proponency. And if you are a force modernization proponent, to dominate your proponent. Like I said, if you can go ahead and bring up this chart. You saw this earlier in a different format. Mission Command. The Mission Command Center of Excellence is the force modernization proponent for Mission Command. But a lot of people don't understand what's underneath Mission Command. It's a philosophy, it's a warfighting function, it's a process, it's a system, it's a thing, it's a person, it's a place, it's a whole bunch of different things. But inside of it, though, is the tactical network. And unlike our brothers who live in the Fire Center of Excellence and the Aviation Center of Excellence, where there really is a stovepipe of folks that dominate those proponencies, for the Mission Command, for John and I, we live in a world where, because it is the integrating and synchronizing warfighting functions for all the other warfighting functions, everybody has an opinion on Mission Command. And everybody has an opinion on the network. And they love to point out the fact that the network is broken. But we're going to talk about the complexities of what really that means when you say, hey, the network is broken. Because there's a whole bunch of different layers that are out there. But this chart illustrates that very thing. And Pete kind of alluded to it. The chief, in my mind, he is the proponent for Mission Command. As the Chief of Staff of the Army, he's the guy that kind of drives this. And so that's why he took a personal interest in this particular slide, the principles, characteristics, and requirements of the network. And many of you in this room have seen this before, but we always kind of come back to an anchor to this slide. And not long into that path that we talked about this morning, it was one of the first. What are our first principles? What are we trying to get after? What are the principles of the network? What are the principles of what we're trying to do? And how should it enable Mission Command? And we literally spent weeks going over every single word inside of this thing. And the reason why, and you would say that's kind of a no-kidder. The Army, the network should enable the preparation for or the conduct of war. Why is that important? Well, in the past, if you go to a mission training complex, that is a different network than the network you go to train with. And that is a different network in some cases than you may fight with. Every time we send a RAF brigade over to Europe, they have to reconfigure their network to be able to conform to the network that is in Europe. And as John and I will allude to here in a little bit, this single integrated end-to-end architecture that allows you to operate anywhere in the world, anytime, is critically important going forward. And I'll give a vignette as to how we got away with it for 15 years and why that's not going to work into the future. So it really does, as Pete kind of talked about this morning, the principles, the why, it's the preparation of war or the conduct of war, a single integrated network. That ties to the warfighting requirements. And if you think about the modernization priorities, in fact, the Chief pointed this out to us the other day when he asked a question in one of the meetings we were in and said, hey, who can articulate what the not just what the 6 modernization priorities are, but the order in which they come? Anyone know what the first one is? Next generation combat vehicle, right? Shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. And so if you think about those 6 modernization priorities, shoot, next generation combat vehicle. Number 2 is what? I'm sorry, first one, I even screwed that up. First one is long-range precision fires. Next generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, network, integrated air missile defense. I mean, if you kind of go on down the line, it's tied to that right there to be able to shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. And that's how he came up with the priorities for the 6 modernization efforts. And then be able to reliably communicate anywhere, anytime, anywhere in the world. Goes back to that comment when I give the vignette about the Milwaukee Gap, why that's so important.
So we get asked a whole bunch of times, why now? Why after all these years of trying to muddle our way through with the network, why are we getting after it the way in which we are? I would submit to you 2 things that just come to life. With all these operations we've been conducting around the world, the complexity of what we were fielding to our formations and the integration burden we were putting on them was just too much. It was operationally untenable. But the second thing, and you see it throughout all of these principles and characteristics, if we had been sitting on FOBs for a bunch of years operating in a non-contested, non-congested environment, the threat from near-peer adversaries makes this an operational imperative that we get after this right now so that we can operate in a contested and congested environment.
John's going to drill into some of the technical requirements, but from an operator perspective, the thing that was probably the most important to me, and I think a lot of people in this room, is that when you add the complexity of the physical infrastructure of our command posts, the 17 BCS systems that are out there, the battle command systems that are out there, the fact that just about every one of these devices is not intuitive by itself, it requires an incredible amount of training. I joke with my guys, the fact that we have to have a 3-week digital master gunner course to figure out how to work all this stuff and bring it together is almost criminal in my mind. When you guys develop something, an end-user device or an information technology device, if an end user cannot pick that up and very quickly begin to operate that thing with little to no instruction other than a couple of prompts, we wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't buy it. And our systems for our soldiers should be no different. So that first one you see up there, simple and intuitive, that is, for the operators in the room, they will tell you that that's one of the most important. If it's going to truly enable mission command and not be an encumber to mission command, it's got to be simple and intuitive. And it's not just the end, it's all the stuff that's there. Just talking to some folks in the back. I mean, that complexity has to be behind the faceplate, or it has to be back in a place where you don't have to worry about having to actually be in the fight. And so what we have done, and it came up this morning in terms of how we draft requirements. Most folks know what KPPs and KSAs are. We all live in that world in the requirement side. And we used to write requirements that said something to the effect of, after 80 hours of training, a soldier will retain 80% of that which he has learned. Why do you need 80 hours of training to begin with? Why not flip that on its head? And with no training, a soldier will be able to retain 80% of a given function of what that particular device is supposed to do. The way the commercial industry how they do that is they build upon existing knowledge. When you go from Windows 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 to whatever, or picking another end-user device that's out there, when you pick it up, it already kind of looks familiar to you. And it's something that you've been working with for most of your adult life, or in the case of our digital natives, our kids, it's completely natural to them. And that's kind of how we have to go with our current or our future systems that we bring online that are out there.
Go ahead. You want me to do the technical piece now? So we've talked a lot about the Converged Network. Just to sort of level set what that really means, right? It means establishing a single infrastructure, right? A single security architecture that is layered and converged so multiple networks can ride over a single secure network that you can see. That is absolutely step one. Step two is you've now got to turn around and thicken that network so it can operate in that congested and contested environment. It can't just be one single way to move bits and bytes around the network to support mission command. And then you have to overlay the various stovepipe networks on top of it. So the easy one we can always talk about is the Intel network, because at the tactical edge, we're in the process of collapsing the Intel network onto the mission command network. Reduces your satellite footprint, actually provides more paths for Intel data to move around the network. But that's what converged networks are all about. And it's not just in the tactical space. It's got to be nested with the enterprise. Because it goes back to General Mingus' comment about putting complexity where it needs to be. And unfortunately, what we have today is complexity at the edge. And that's the last place that you need that level of complexity. You need to layer it all the way back into the enterprise.
The last two things I'll hit on here, because if General Abrams were here, I know he would touch on it, because this was kind of his personal print. If you look kind of in the center bottom there, enables leaders to lead and fight their formations anywhere. A lot of times we'll go to the combat training centers, we'll go to a big training event, and the lessons learned and the themes will come out of those things. And one of them is that we're not always taking some of these devices to the edge. We got a sitting brigade commander that's here right now. Some of it is the network, but some of it is platform choices. But commanders and leaders out there right now are making bad decisions because they don't always trust the network that they have. That should never be the case. Now, it's not to say that we can't have that pace plan, because there are going to be times when the network doesn't work, but we shouldn't up front by default have to make bad decisions based on a network that is unreliable. And then the other one, and that is the network as a weapon system. We have typically viewed it that it's a way to communicate, the way to develop shared understanding, the way to direct, to visualize, to kind of put things out there that drive an operation. But if we think about all the sensors, all the fires platforms, all the vehicles, all the platforms, every soldier, we had the old say every soldier's a sensor. Well, now imagine this world where all those things are truly connected in an Internet of Things like environment, enabled by, in the future, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and we really can get after the thing that Pete talked about this morning, and that's making decisions faster than the enemy, and that's really what it's all about.
You know, and that is a fundamental mindset, but I will tell you, senior leaders are really starting to grab onto it, and hence why the 3-6 relationship works very good. He's the driver of what that network needs to do. We're the enabler from a signal regiment perspective on providing that capability so he can go out and do his day job.
Yeah. And that did spawn another, I said that was going to be the last thing, but
you lied.
One of the other things that did come up as part of this analysis, and Kristen really is the one that kind of woke us up to this many, many months ago, and that is that we always get into this debate about, hey, what should a squad leader have versus a division commander, or what should a company commander have versus a brigade commander? And we build systems and we build boxes based on the fact that we believe that a squad leader ought to have a little different capability than somebody else at a different echelon. And we build these one-off niche systems by having something that may work up and down at all echelons, so you truly have that common look and feel throughout all, versus just a simple question, who should be connected to the network or not, plain and simple. Because there are those even inside the military that will say a squad leader doesn't need the same capability, which is true to a degree, as maybe a brigade commander or division commander. But the vignette that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit about the Squawky Gap, I mean, if you're the lead platoon or the lead company, the lead battalion going into the breach of the Squawky Gap against a well-prepared 90-day deliberate defense, you're going to want to have everything that the nation can bring to bear to you to be able to punch through that particular gap and be successful. But if we haven't built that capability and given it to that platoon leader, that squad leader, you can't do it on the fly. It's too late. So,
can I talk the standards-based architecture real quick? So you're going to hear, you already have heard, the Army talk a whole bunch about a standards-based architecture. Now, what we are not going to do is establish this architecture that is so stringent that we can't harness industry innovation. But what we are going to do is establish some right and left limits that say, if you want to plug into the Army architecture, and this is stolen from the SOCOM and JSOCs of the world, so folks that deal with them understand the principles that we're talking about. There's the right and left limits. Because what we can't do is have one-offs come in that can't plug into it or actually create another stovepipe network. It's got to be able to play. And what we're really trying to do is leverage the power of an all-IP world. Because if we lay out that foundation in a converged manner, we are going to get that flat and fast network that we envision over the course of time. How do we leverage an all-IP network so we can leverage industry innovation to move faster and in a much more iterative fashion.
Anything else you wanted to drive on this one, or are we ready to go?
I'd ask that you tag team on the back end of this. You'll notice it says joint interoperability, and you heard General Gallagher talk about it a little bit earlier, about making sure that everything that we do is inherently joint. That sounds intuitive, but the reality of it is in practice, we rarely get after it. I will tell you, at the enterprise, we've actually had more success than we have at the tactical level. But that is our foundation now. Joint interoperability, built into everything we're doing, and coalition accessible.
Yeah, and from we're going to drill into this tomorrow in fact, Joe Fossey's going to lead this discussion, but multinational interoperability, most people look at that from a very binary perspective of, can I talk to them or not? Can I exchange data with them or not? But it is far more complicated than that. When you think about all the partners around the world, nearly 200 nations that we could potentially partner with, as the chief kind of pointed out, we cannot afford as an Army to be fully interoperable and integrated with every single one of those potential ones that are out there. So you really have to look at it, and we've laid out a framework that first starts with, okay, what kind of partner are you talking about? If it's Five Eyes, if it's NATO, if it's our Pacific Pathway partners, I mean, they're in a different category than nations we typically don't work with. Same thing on we have the joint is a non-negotiable, but on the coalition and even on the interagency side. So there's layers underneath interoperability. There's integrated, there's compatible, there's deconflicted, and then there's zero. There's none whatsoever. And then you have to look at it by echelon. We will typically go and do a training event, and most of our training events occur kind of at the company and below level. And as a result, we'll come out of there and say, you know what, we really couldn't do this well together, we couldn't do that well together, but the reality is our Army is optimized to fight as BCTs, moving towards optimization of divisions and above, echelons above brigade. So why would you sub-optimize and cross over inside of that? So you have to be very, very careful what lessons you draw from some of the training exercises we do. So you have to look at it by echelon. And then you have to look at it across all the warfighting functions. But there are some non-negotiables. If we know that there's going to be coalition fast movers overhead in a theater, CAS procedures ought to be common throughout. And so there's multiple layers to this, and that's one of the things we're kind of getting, not just the digital component of it, but all those things that are associated with interoperability.
Yeah, the last technical piece that I would hit is putting my other hats on. Cybersecurity and operating in a contested and congested electromagnetic spectrum has got to be built into everything that we're doing. We've got to come up with ways to mitigate our electronic signature so we're not always on, or we can hide in plain noise, because quite frankly, a lot of the near peers that are out there have gone to school on how we operate, and they've built those kind of capabilities. And in cybersecurity, and the ability to defend our networks and to see our networks needs to be built into everything that we do at every single echelon.
Okay. Next chart, please. So you saw a version of this morning when Pete talked. And on the left-hand side is really where we started. About a year and a half ago, we did a tabletop exercise here at Fort Leavenworth where we brought in all the key stakeholders, and we war-gamed what we thought the future network requirements were going to be against a PACOM, UCOM, and a CENTCOM scenario. So a near peer, a peer, and a less than peer kind of competitor. And tried to figure out what those broad operational requirements were going to be needed for the network. Pete talked about, and the three big ones were network convergence, data convergence, identity management, and then some of the others that have now spawned out of this latest planning effort, common operating environment, interoperability, command posts, and our transport, which drove where we're trying to go. But on that left-hand side, and why this thing is so complicated, the thing he didn't go into, and I'll try and drill it down another level, is that at the Joint Staff DoD level, I mean, there's literally 1,000-plus disparate networks that don't all talk to each other. Thousands of data centers. Just inside the Army, we have 69 disparate networks. We started at 1,900 disparate data centers that didn't all talk to each other. And we all individually have at least 4 or 5 identities based on the classification level and where you're operating. And so as a result, we can't take in mass form, move formations anywhere in the world and have that network up and operational. So we levied, the CIOG and the signal folks of the world have been trying to drive network convergence for a very long time, but it was never dubbed as an operational requirement. The vignette that I'm going to paint that Pete didn't talk about and why this, what is the pacing threat we're talking about? Well, everybody's heard the chairman discuss 4+1. We know what that is, right? China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, and violent extremist organizations are the 4+1. That was kind of codified also in our recent national defense strategy in terms of where we're trying to go and the elements within that. But let's just take one of those as what we're kind of calling our pacing threat. And what I'm going to say you can find in any RAND study that's out there, but there's this little place, probably everybody in here has been to Europe, right? And you've been to Germany. If you go north of Germany, there's this little country called Poland. And if you start heading up to the northwest corner or northeast corner of Poland, there's this little place called the Suwałki Gap, which is 63 kilometers wide. On the west side of that, you have a place called Kaliningrad. And on the east side of that, you have a place called Belarus. And there's two major locks that run up in between the northeast corner of Poland and Lithuania. There are many that believe if there were an incursion, because our buddies have always long wanted to close that gap between Belarus and have a land bridge to Kaliningrad. They have this thing called an anti-access aerial denial system built around and in and around Kaliningrad. Our ability to react to an incursion like that, because what those open source studies will tell you, they would apply somewhere between 28 and 30 battle groups, about 10 divisions worth of folks to be able to close that and create an unassailable flank. And that A2AD umbrella backs you away literally hundreds of kilometers. So now, to be able to respond to that, it would literally take months. We've all built foxholes, right? Imagine the kind of foxhole you could build in 90 days. That's a pretty good deliberate defense across a 63-kilometer front with no assailable flank. Thus, why the network we have right now in a hyperdynamic environment will not work. Why our command posts, the physical infrastructure of our command posts that take 18 to 24 hours to tear down and reset up, a network that takes forever to reset up, will just not work in that particular environment. That's the scenario that is driving that network you see on the right-hand side and why this is so important.
Were you going to do the scenario?
What's that?
Were you going to do the scenario? Or was that it?
That was it.
That was it? Okay. You changed it on me.
Sorry.
From the last one, but that's good. So you heard Jim talk about operationally why this is needed. And we've already talked about the 4 lines of effort, and I think that makes sense to most folks as an organizing construct. But it's really those supporting efforts I just want to sort of draw everybody to. Institutional reform, I would submit to you, sort of encompasses everybody that's in this room, not just the green suiters or the DA civilians. All of us are going to need to change our approach to how we're actually trying to do stuff. We're fundamentally going to have to look at things that are differently. To take a look at a radio program that was going to go out to 2040 and beyond, I would submit to you was a fool's errand, but that was the approach. What we're really looking at are 3 to 5 year spins so we can stay relevant, harness the latest innovation that is out there. And I'm sure somebody's going to bring it up. We've talked a little bit about why things are different. I get asked it all the time as somebody that was involved in the NIE back in the day. I've never seen the Army leadership this galvanized. They certainly weren't. We all talked NIE back in the game, but I've never seen the Army leadership this galvanized to get after reforms. And I would just submit to you that is something that is fundamentally different from taking a swing at this one 5-6 years ago. But institutional reform is all of us. We are challenging policies and governance left and right because we know we've got to break some eggs from a bureaucratic standpoint to make the barriers to entry much easier for all of us to collectively operate. And then aligning our research development and science technology, something that General Gallagher's doing very hard with the network side, and I'm doing from the cyber and EW side, needs to be targeted on those things that are absolutely unique to military operations, or where we can provide some incentive to industry to help us move along a little bit faster. Really into those 2 buckets, because we clearly understand in an IT world, we have to leverage industry innovation if we're going to keep pace and not be fielding yesterday's technology tomorrow.
So then, going to the future state, and somebody asked a question about Home Station Mission Command. So in that scenario that I just painted, It's where we talk multi-core, multi-division. It's a mobilization, so home station mission command. It's en route and to the tactical edge, because we believe that we will be contested from there all the way. I mean, it literally is an approach march from the time we're mobilized to the time we get into the close fight. And that network of things, that Internet of Things, that thing that we're trying to produce on the right-hand side has got to be critical to ensure that happens seamlessly from one end to the other. We can't afford to take days to reconfigure the network once we get into a theater of operation. So that, we talked about it this morning, that integrated end-to-end network is absolutely critical to being able to be successful in the future.
And I would submit to you, it is a fact that we will be challenged before we even try and get out of here. All you all have to do is pick a news program, and you can see in open source some of the things that are happening.
Now the one difference, though, Kevin, when General Eddie first came up with the idea, he was thinking stability-like environments, because we really weren't predicting pure kind of. It was kind of. So he viewed home station mission commands. We might be able to be in a world with rainbows and bunnies and gumdrops and jelly beans where we wouldn't have to deploy whole divisions to go deal with a stability fight. That a lot of those other kind of higher end threats may not be in our immediate future. But we now realize after the events of 2014 that we cannot do that. So there's still an absolute requirement and a need to have robust home station mission commands so that you can begin that planning, begin that mobilization at home, and take it all the way to the tactical edge. But if it is a peer competitor, the idea behind leaving the D main back at Fort Carson or Fort Campbell is probably, it's a slightly different twist on what we had thought about before.
So the reality is we've got to be able to go both ways, right? Because we can't train just for the near peer and not have that capability, when the reality of it is that you will be doing this split-based ops for anything we do akin to reacting to Ebola on the continent, as an example. We need to be able to do the entire spectrum.
Yeah, because we'll probably, none of us want this fight, and the vast majority of the Army will probably spend most of its time in a stability-like environment. General Valesky would have never guessed in a million years that he was going to end up in Central Africa dealing with that particular problem. Okay. Next chart. Okay, so starting to get into a little bit of the plan now itself at the tactical level. When we started this, it was really last June when we flushed out the actual options, of which this is the one that was picked and the decision was made. But we looked at 4 broad options. One was status quo, believe it or not, because there had been in the works for some time a network modernization plan that was pretty solid. It was sound, but it was going to take us till 2032, and it was unaffordable. We would have never gotten there in the time that we needed in a fight tonight kind of scenario. The second one was to accelerate certain components of it. But going back to Pete's comment this morning about resources and revenue, we were challenged with how do you pay for that acceleration. The other one was literally a cold, hard stop and just start over. And we war gamed every single one of those things out ad nauseum in incredible detail. And we looked at it from a political, a resourcing, and an operational perspective. And war gamed each one of those out in terms of how we could get after it. And at the end of the day, this is the one that we chose because we wanted to have a long-term modernization strategy, but there was also the thing that we couldn't get away from, and that is, if we have to go tonight, we're going to go with what we got. And so there's some things that we absolutely needed to fix to get us there. So the premise behind it, we've hit this first one, integrated, unified, end-to-end, to be able to lead fight from anywhere you choose. But the next one is we get into and so I think we've kind of hit the vision part of this. But this next one is important, I think, in particular for industry, a cascading, successive set of future states. That picture that you saw, that's kind of future state 1. But there's going to be a future state 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're not going to be, we know how the Army works, we're not going to be able to field the entire Army with that first future state right away. In fact, we'll probably only be able to do a portion of the Army. But if it is plug and play, if it is integrated end to end, we get it out to, and don't hold me to this, but let's say it's a third of the Army gets that first future state. Well, we're immediately beginning to work on future state 2. And what does that look like? And as it comes online, you cascade that future state 1 down to the other third of the Army, and so on and so forth. Just like at my house anyway, when the new phones come out, I get the good stuff, my kids get the old stuff. In Brian Menace's house, he gets the old stuff and his kids get the new stuff. So I guess it depends on, what family you. I don't know, John. What's your philosophy? You get the good stuff?
All my kids are gone.
Oh, they're still not on the plan?
Yeah, no, they're on the plan, but they pay their own bills.
Oh, but you get the point. I mean, it's not. We want to buy less more often for two things. One is it better sets the Army up for success, but it also helps us keep pace with technology over the long haul.
Which is why that standards-based architecture and those interfaces is going to be so important, because that's a different look at interoperability just internal to the Army. Got to be able to go forward, got to be able to go backward, because the Army's always got to be able to operate with itself no matter where it's coming from.
Okay. Unified network, common operating environment, interoperability, command posts. We'll kind of tag team these a little bit. John's going to talk initially about the ITN, and going back to your point last night, Kevin, here's another twist on this. We got to do a better job of communicating to you the question came up. We've come up with all these new terms. We've got integrated tactical network. We've got unified network. We've got a whole bunch of new terms we've introduced, and we're still using old. We probably need to, for the broader audience, clean up, be very, very crystal clear what we mean in our lexicon.
Yeah, so I do agree. But let me take one little stab at it, and maybe I can help out a little bit. So unified network is that end-to-end component. All right, enterprise down to tactical, converged, riding on that single infrastructure, single security architecture so you can see each other. That integrated tactical network is really how do you get that tactical edge, i.e. radios and troops and all those folks that are there, get them connected seamlessly, unlike we've done in the past, into the IP layer. So it is common and unifying all the way across the board. Right now, if I were to show you our current architecture for how we do that, it is stovepipe, single point of failure, stovepipe, single point of failure, stovepipe, single point of failure. What you want is, again, leveraging the power of an all-IP world, multiple abilities so that you've got almost an automatic pace plan as you're moving along, and you can connect into whatever infrastructure is available. So that's the unifying component of it. The ITN is really how do you get that lower end tied back into something that actually is unified.
The common operating environment, that's going to be one of the drill downs, so I won't go too far, but suffice to say, given our current 17 disparate battle command systems that we have now, CPOF, AFCEA, TAS, AMDUs, Geeks, etc., that will all, in the next couple of years, collapse truly onto a single integrated architecture, a single unified data layer with applications supporting those warfighting functions riding on top. And that came up last night, too. We are going to advertise in a software development kit standards what that is so that everybody can play inside that environment. We want you to know what those standards are associated with the common operating environment, because this will be one of those that constantly is evolving, adapting, and getting better over time. But that's essentially what the common operating environment is going to give us, to include the simplicity, intuitiveness, and what I've challenged the team with is that what I talked about earlier, that 80%, you got to be able to pick up that device, that end user device, and with a couple of prompts, you're going. Vice the way we do it now. Oh, interoperability. The only other thing I'd say there, because I kind of touched on that with multinational interoperability and what Joe and our team are doing together on that, is it tied back to COE, we typically have, and in the past, built by default and by design incompatible boxes, because everything we do is secret no-foreign. We build a secret no-foreign box, whether it's CPOF or AFCEA, our fire system, versus in the future, it's all about access to the data and your identity management. You don't, in this secure but unclassified environment that we're prototyping and experimenting with right now, is an example of how we're trying to get away with what we're doing there. We think within the Army here, very, very, what is going to be our command net to fight with? Is it a secret no-foreign net? Is it a secret releasable net? Is it a secure but unclassified net? And where in that echelon do you make that break? Because you do have to have a point where you're dealing with sensitive information, but probably not at the tactical edge. And so at the 3-star level, that decision is pretty close to being mature, and we want to tee that up for the chief here relatively quickly in terms of what is going to be the command net we're going to fight on in the future. And then last one, command posts. That'll be another one that we drill in on this afternoon, but I think a lot of people have heard this, but there's 3 phases of that. This year, we are going to experiment with the G8 signed a directive requirement in December. 1 corps, 2 divisions, 3 BCTs, 1 of each type, and then 4 multifunctional brigades with ISO containers, expando vans, command post support vehicles, Wi-Fi, and smart power to ensure that we've got the configurations right. There won't be a lot of integration that happens initially, just to make sure we've got the configurations right, this number versus that number, that supports our various command posts, both mobile command group, TACs, main, support area command posts. We already talked about en route and home station mission command. Phase 2 will be some integration now based on lessons we learn, and then phase 3 is a full-up program to drive where we're going to go with the physical infrastructure of our command posts in the future.
So Pete talked about the halt, fix, and pivot. I really won't touch on that one, but I will talk about the means. As we took a look at our overall strategy, it was about reinvesting so we could fight tonight. What are those things that we must go fix right now so that we can operate in a contested and congested environment while pivoting to a new way of doing business, which is really what you see there. And the adapt, buy, try, decide, there's 1,000 different ways that you can sit there and say it. But the reality of it is the Army doesn't need to try and develop its own IT solutions. We need to leverage industry innovation and then proven solution that our sister services or the SOF community have already put into play. And if we're able to bring that into our network and it fixes a gap that we have, then that's what we need to be doing, and then focus our RDT&E efforts on primarily those things that are unique to us to operate in a contested and congested environment, whether that's against a cyber threat or against an EW threat.
Okay. Next chart, please. And go ahead, go to the last one. This is just an introduction. I'm not going to hurt your heads by briefing this to you because it's in your packets. It's in the implementation plan. But this is just to show you every campaign, every strategy has to have a framework. Ends, ways, and means. You saw that from a narrative perspective. Now broken out over time in terms of near, mid, and long term. What does that look like? And it really tries to drive home this idea behind the successive set of future cascading or future states that are out there. We've got some near-term objectives, and in our analysis, many of the things that we will buy and fix in 18 and 19 were to buy down the operational risk from a mission command and a peer competitor standpoint from high back down to medium. And so many of the things that we're doing in the next couple of years is designed specific. It's based on things that are out there right now, proven in either the joint SOF or industry community that we can buy today, apply immediately, without a huge amount of pain to start to buy down that operational risk. And then as you start to get beyond that, where you see 21, 25, that's where those successive set of true future states begin to come online. And the thing I would offer to you is that because we are going to buy less more often, and we're going to not buy it for the entire Army over the course of 20, 30 years like we've done in the past, if for whatever reason you're not part of Future State 2, you can be part of Future State 3 because we're going to start to work on that immediately. We want everybody to be able to compete openly and fairly inside that environment, ultimately delivering a better network every time we bring in one of those future states that are out there.
Yeah, already you're seeing the Army bureaucracy to start to adapt to this model. And primarily right now it's on the requirement side because, quite frankly, that's where this whole thing's got to really start. Both Jim with the Common Operating Environment and then the Cyber Center with defensive cyber operations and now offensive cyber operations have established what we call IT boxes. They're authorities that have been out there for a long time, but quite frankly, they just have not been operationalized. So how long do you think it takes to get a standard requirements document through the entire process using the old model? About 35 years, right? I mean, depending on how it flows. We both followed about the same timeline for COE and DCO, but I'll use DCO because I'm more familiar with that one. The initial capabilities document approved in December. The first 2 requirements definition packages approved 2 months later. Prototypes showing up in the Cyber Protection Brigade at the end of April for us to go ahead and start doing some rapid spins on them with a final decision in the June timeframe. And that's roughly the time frame that we're using to get after these capabilities, because it's going to spin.
Okay. Last thing I'll leave you with from a long-term perspective. We started floating some quotes out of this center anyway about a year ago in terms of the importance of artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, neuro computing, etc. Something to the effect of the first country, the first element that kind of truly realizes and is able to harness and realize the power of artificial intelligence tied to autonomy is probably going to dominate for the next several decades that are out there. In June, July, The Economist, there was a quote, the headline of their newspaper, hey, it's no longer about oil, it's about big data. If you look at what a lot of the companies that are out there are working on for next-gen commercial wireless and cellular service that are out there, it's going to be all about high-altitude geostationary balloons that have pods in the bottom of them, low orbiting Earth satellites that kind of change the dynamics of what our future, not just in the military, but what the future network holds that are out there. When you look at imagery, it used to be about resolution. We're going to go from 20 meter to 10 meter to 5 meter to 1 meter to point whatever, and now you got commercial imagery that's out there that's pretty darn good. And so it's no longer about resolution, but it's about refresh rates to the point where you're almost going to have the ability to have full motion video of the whole world all the time in a commercial sector. Now, what does that mean? It goes back to big data. That's a lot of useless dirt gazing that you really can't do it. And who's sifting through that? And who's doing what with it? Without tools that we know are coming online, we will never be able to sift through the truth from the fiction or from the other. That scenario that I painted about the Shiwaki Gap, nobody wants to play that out because the end result, if it goes all the way, nobody wants that. And our adversaries know that too. So they want to compete in what we call this competition period, the below the threshold and levels of open conflict. And they're going to do it through information, economics, corruption, big data, and they're going all in. So we need to collectively work together. You will only, left to your own devices, move at a pace in which is economically viable to you. And that makes sense. We will only move at a pace that we can afford, which is not going to be fast enough. Our adversaries are taking that all together and moving at a pace and they're taking our stuff and kind of capitalizing on it, and they're going to be able to realize that before we do. I hope not, but we have to collectively work together to ensure that we are ahead of that and realize it first, because he who gets there first or she gets there first can continue to stay ahead of the rest of the game. So I just offer that out there as a teaser, because as we look beyond even these future states, that's something that we've all got to start to take very, very seriously in the future. And I know you live this every day in the cyber world, so I don't know if you got anything else to say there, John.
No, autonomous learning, the ability to see yourself. When I say see yourself, it's not just a red or a green dot up on a screen. It is literally to see what is flowing through the pipes. In the cyber domain is absolutely key. And quite frankly, right now, we can't keep up with the stuff that's flowing just today. And so getting that fixed so that you actually can see and understand is absolutely critical in the cyber domain.
Okay. Well, we've got 11:15, right, sir? Okay, we've got about 15, 20 minutes for questions and answers. That kind of closes out the formal portion of this segment.
Either we were really good or you guys are ready for lunch.
Or beer, sure.
Army Interoperability and Coalition Interoperability. How do we need to pay attention of taking advantage and being innovative and taking advantage of technology without exasperating the gap that exists between us and our coalition partners. And when I talk to them all the time, there are a lot that say they're they're going to feed their industrial base, and so they're not open to really converging on the U.S. standards, or their defense force funding is not as liberal as the U.S. And so, talk about radios, going after new waveforms. Are we really paying attention? Are we opening that gap even more as we migrate to new waveforms and taking advantage of technology and being innovative? We're moving out. However, I hear often from my allies that they really can't keep up with the gap that exists today. And how do we ensure that we have a balance of that as we're pushing forward, modernizing? Over.
You want to talk about your unit?
I think the answer is yes, we are taking advantage of it. I mean, if you look at what we're doing in northern Iraq right now, based on this secure but unclassified architecture that we've kind of put together, we were very able to, even in a country that did not have a sophisticated mission command network, we were able to very rapidly pull together, using both the tactical space and the commercial infrastructure, a tactical network that worked incredibly effective using very simple, off-the-shelf available things today. And so there's that component of it. What we are driving towards, if you just want to talk digits, secure voice, being able to share data, have a true shared cop, and fires. Those are kind of the big priorities that we're working on initially. And we're developing solutions, gateway, patchway kind of solutions for theirs now, but in the future, it is truly about access to the data versus having incompatible things. But the thing that we can't do for some nations that are out there, we take for granted. So depending on, going back to my decision, where's the decision the chief's going to have to make, where do we set the command net at? If we raise it too high, there are some countries out there, so now you're dealing with ComSec and encryption that requires classification and security clearances to be able to even carry that in the field. So even if we sell a partner nation the right compatible radio, if we don't get the encryption and classification levels right, because they don't have, like we do, soldiers that can carry that encryption with them to the field, if they lose that, once you get into the tactical space, you're right back to unsecure voice. So it's not just the stuff, it's also systems and processes and people and understanding who we're working with that are out there. So that's why we think this decision on where that boundary lies is going to be important, because it opens up a whole door to many more partners that are out there for compatibility than what we've had in the past.
Yeah, what I would submit to you, I mean, take a look at the developing nations in the world, right? I mean, they just skipped all the way through that landline piece and went straight to cellular, check? So leveraging COT solutions that are out there, getting into this all-IP world helps us move along that line faster. The biggest inhibitor is, that we haven't really said it, is making sure we got the policy set straight, because then you can really, really flatten it. And that's what we're learning in northern Iraq and in other places. You live that policy world every day. Sir.
I'm Stan Feinstein with Project Remedies. In the 4 areas that you mentioned, unified networks, common operating environment, interoperability, command posts, where does support fit? Somebody's going to call. Something's going to go bump in the night. Somebody's going to call the service desk. Where does that fit?
Yeah, so it doesn't fit cleanly in any of them because you have it overlay on everything. So you're going to have a network connectivity, read unified transport challenge that somebody needs to make a phone call on. You're going to have a application challenge that somebody's going to have to make a phone call on. You're going to have an interoperability challenge where I can't talk to one of our sister service partners piece. So it's not as clean as you would like it to be. But it does tie back into the discussion that we were having earlier about where does complexity lie, right? Because you're not going to be able to put a COE application manager into every battalion formation. And I'm just making that up, right? You want to have that complexity at the right place with the 1-800 call this help desk that can address a challenge. So as General Mingus sat there and so eloquently sat there and said, you take the complexity and you put it behind the base plate. Right now, unfortunately, we have the complexity on the base plate, and as you know well, sir, going to your specific question, we've got help desks everywhere, right? You need to raise that complexity up and only push down what you absolutely need to.
Well, I think you need, along with a single network, you need a single service desk, a single 800 number to call, a single way to do that.
Just due to scope and scale, I'm not sure we'll ever truly get to a single one, but we'll probably get to a single construct that allows us to follow the sun. I do think we will have that. Now, what I will tell you is one of the things that I was going to point at Mark Parker, but he left. One of the things that Mark, which I'm going to duly note later, one of the things that Mark Parker's working on is a unified NetOps requirements document so that we actually layer what we're doing at the enterprise with what we're doing at the tactical edge. And unlike how we've done it in the past where we build up at the top and then we push it down and then it doesn't work in an austere or a congested environment, we're going to flip the paradigm and work it back the other way. Again, it's to raise that complexity up and put it at the appropriate echelons.
I wish from a communication standpoint and a leadership standpoint, support was one of those pillars,
right.
Okay, to get the urgency going. That's probably the wrong term, but to get the focus on this as well as one of the key elements.
So what I would tell you is, unlike how it's laid out on the chart, it is underpinning. So cyber security is being baked into all this, unified NetOps is being baked into all this, and then operating in a contested and congested environment is being baked into all this. But again, it goes back to it's not a separate, distinct component of it. It's got to underline all the other aspects of it.
Sure. The only thing I'd add, we talked about where do you put the complexity, which is critical. The network convergence, because, and John lived this in his last job, the 60-some that I talked about all have their own way of doing business. So it goes back to why, I tell my counterparts on the operator side, we've got to get behind the signal folks of the world in driving this network convergence, because it will never, like you said, it'll never be that single person. But until we even get close to a true integrated converged network, to include the data centers associated with it, then to get after, you're always going to be going in different directions when you have a challenge associated with it. Now, it's a little easier at the tactical edge because we are driving hard, and we'll get there sooner. But as you link that back to the enterprise and the business and the intel and everything else, as long as that remains fragmented and stovepiped and everything else, we'll never get to where you're talking about. So we've got to continue to beat that drum of moving that as quickly as we can.
I can tell you that I understand the urgency. I'm trying to drive the urgency, and I get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, well,
I won't stop. We know that.
Greg Brazil from Viasat. I recently retired from the Marine Corps, and looking at this from a Marine Corps lens, you're creating a new architecture. Great. I applaud everything you're doing. I think it's awesome. How integrated are the other services in your whole process so that they're informed and that their requirements definition can be informed so that they can hopefully follow your lead?
I can, from a COE and everything else, I think we're pretty closely lashed up. Because we're moving out, that common operating environment that we talked about. It's going through the joint validation process right now, and we want to open that up to the other services, that, especially our Marine brethren that are out there. I think we're pretty closely aligned. Now, the one thing that we need to probably do a better job is, because the vision of this Internet of Things like environment where you're linking sensor to shooter to platform to joint fires platform and everything else, the distinction between, in the old days of direct and indirect fires and joint CAS platforms has almost collapsed like our network. The distance in which our direct fire weapon systems can now engage and destroy the enemy has far exceeded anything we ever imagined back when we used to have the differences between direct, indirect, and close air support platforms. all that now has to be tied together, because what used to be delivered by an indirect system could theoretically be delivered by a direct system much more economically, much more effectively, and everything else. But until you know that, and you've got the SA as a commander or a leader to make that decision, going back to this, how do we build better SA and make better decisions, then we're never really going to get there. So we probably, there was something in the paper today, the challenge between the F-22 and the F-35. Even within the services, we've got challenges. So we all collectively have to do a better job of treating this as a weapon system, not just the individual pieces of it. Super Dave.
Yes, Dave Comar from ARCIC. One of the things we're doing, and this is an Army-wide, service-wide joint problem, is looking at all of our sensors and all of our shooters and how we exchange that information and better enable the application of whether it's direct, indirect, or joint fires. So we're standing up an ICDT, specifically with the Marine Corps. In fact, we're meeting today with MCCITIC. We've got a very close working relationship with MCCITIC. We've got an LNO up there. They've got an LNO down at ARCIC. So I would say we are most closely tied with the Marine Corps, and then probably the Air Force after that, and then the Navy after that. But we're going to bring all the services in. So it's not just going to be a TRADOC or an Army ICDT. We're going to look at all the services, because a lot of it's policy. Some services will accept, for instance, sensor data that we get and publish out over Link 16 and use that to be able to engage a target. And some services don't accept that data. So we are definitely looking at that from a joint perspective.
But if you listen to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and he talks about his vision of how this network of things works in the future, it's very similar to what we've talked about today. So I think all the services realize the benefit of it.
Ken Peterman from Viasat. I applaud what you're doing. You've spoken a lot, primarily from a kind of an operational view, which I appreciate. I think if I were to convey it in a little bit more of a technical view, I would say, and so I'm asking this as a question, you're moving more away from a platform-centric architecture toward a cloud-based architecture, where as long as it's standard-based, the transport layer, for example, doesn't matter. It could be Link 16, it could be TrellisWare, it could be SATCOM. In a mobile networking environment, you could say it's Orange or Verizon or AT&T. It doesn't matter as long as you have access to the cloud and the cloud information is secure and maintains its integrity. So perhaps from General Morrison's perspective, I think data custodianship, so that you avoid latency from one perspective, spoofing from another perspective, the maintenance and the custodianship of the cloud information becomes really important in the forward-looking architecture. Would that be correct?
I think I understand your question. I'm going to flip it back just a little bit, because we were actually having this conversation earlier that we use cloud very loosely at times, and so cloud, to your point, is an architecture. Some of it can be forward. It's really about where does the data reside, what needs to be resident forward, and then what can be somewhere else because it's just not quite as important. Or if you operate in a disconnected environment, it's not that important, right? And so that is where we need to use. Now, what I will tell you, one of the biggest things that the Army is going to have to work, because both of us throw it around out there, we're going to have, this data thing where we've got data standards and all that other piece. That is hard PhD level work that's still to be done, right? Because when I define data, you define it differently. And until we level set that component of it and really start sinking our teeth into what are we going to do from a data perspective, a lot of this stuff is still going to continue to be a challenge. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question specifically, but that is really the next big step that we have to get towards when we start talking about implementation. We've got to clearly define what the standards-based architecture, right and left limits are going to be, or interfaces, or whatever term we end up coming up with. We're going to need to do the same thing on the COE, and then we're going to need to take it down to the next level, because data is applied to both of them, and put it in place there as well. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I've just those 1,900 data centers that we had going to 1,100 now. Eventually, we'll get down to 20-some. I mean, that is part of the problem. That gets after this this broader cloud environment. But there still will be a requirement for these regional hub nodes around the world that there's that constant replication based on what you're trying to or what you need, kind of in a theater. But we'll never get away, I don't think, because of what John just talked about. You can have a reliable network, but you can never guarantee. I mean, even in a perfect world, there's never going to be 100% connection. So there will always be this need for a localized data source, a tactical server infrastructure, which is getting smaller and smaller every day. The thing that we're going back, how much of that does reside locally versus back at the regional hub node. There are some that want to acquiesce, hey, we're not going to have a network in the future. And that briefs well, but if you're going to exercise mission command, which implies shared understanding throughout the depth and breadth of an operation, if you don't fight to get that network back, then that shared understanding goes away the minute we cross LD. We could maybe go an hour, a day, or two, but at some point you got to come back together. We got to reconnect. We got to re-level bubbles. We got to get that shared understanding back out there, and that ties back to the network. But what we go back and forth on is, to your, I guess, very specific question is, how much of it do you keep localized versus at regional versus the central hubs? And key also is, when it does come back together, the synchronization and replication of that data to get that shared understanding back out across the force.
Yeah, and we so you know this already. We so talk past each other when we start talking cloud, because everybody starts thinking it's truly in the cloud. Like, I never see it. I don't know where the heck it is. It's only in one place. And as you know, that's not how this stuff works, right? It's in different places. It's replicated, to Jim's point, and it's fairly resilient. That's why they call it a cloud. But there's always going to be some instantiation, a part of that architecture that's going to move forward.
And you guys know this better than we do. I mean, we used to have POC3T has a great couple of charts, 1,300 pounds versus server stacks, now down to about 300 pounds. But, I mean, we're going to laptop servers now. And eventually, your end-user devices could act as a local server source that's out there. So, I mean, we're right there to reducing the size and the scope of what you physically got to take forward.
Josh Salmonson, NCI. Based on your last response, do you see the challenge events like CyberQuest either increasing in tempo or a change in the type of challenges that we would be asked as industry to respond to get to some of these outcomes faster?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm going to tell you where we're trying to take CyberQuest, right? And then I'll give you my personal opinion, right? So I think where we're trying to take CyberQuest is we want to link it to Cyber Blitz. And so now it's sort of like two exercises conducted on a semi-annual basis that build on each other, that allow us to start morphing some of the discussions we were just having. What does this really need to look like? And then how can we nest that under what General Gallagher's doing and feed him information? Whether it's from the cybersecurity aspects or how to operate in a contested ingested environment, or what we were just talking about from what does it really look like to do a cloud, quote unquote, in a tactical environment. And so we are working that portion of it. I think we're in pretty good step with CERDEC. Matter of fact, we go up and support a big portion of their exercise already. My personal opinion is when this experimentation really starts rolling, it's not going to be this one. I mean, right now it's, we're going to go do this at a brigade level. We're going to go do this at a brigade level. I think what you're going to start seeing is a set of discrete experimentations that's done with the appropriate scale to make an informed decision. And I don't think that's going to be once or twice a year we're going to go try and do something. I think it's going to be based off of when a capability is available, what's the scale that we need to actually do it, so we can make that informed decision. And I think it will start moving like this. I don't know if you disagree.
I do not.
Okay. That would have sucked if he had said he did.
Hi, I'm Scott Bublin from Mobile Reasoning. I've got a comment and a question. You talk about a goal of improving commanders' OODA loop decision making, and so I'll obviously you guys are striving to do that in your acquisition process. I've been part of I'm a commercial guy that also does defense. I was part of the re-engineering of telecoms in the United States in the 90s, where Sprint rebuilt everything in a very short amount of time, about 3 years. And they'd originally thought it was going to take them 20. And then I went and worked on Wall Street where we did the same thing. And the comment I have is when you're looking at redoing architectures and requirements, even if you're really smart and think you know the problem, a lot of times you have to prototype and explore that problem to solve it. And so as I've worked with the Army, some counter-ID work in the past, and I've been working with the Navy recently, and they're trying to share data across the battlefield. They're calling it a kill web. It's essentially, bringing all the sensor data in, making decisions, and then allocating weapons to targets. And their system is pretty much a stovepipe, right? And multi-domain battle is part of that. So the question I have is, when people work on requirements, you can be smart and think about it. And you said there's PhD people that struggle with data sciences. I'm one of those guys. And as I started working with the Navy and trying to bring in Link 16 air picture data, and then I started bringing in electronic warfare data, ahead of time I would have thought I understood how to change my big data model, how to do that. And once I started working on it, the volumes of the data they deal with are so big. And then they started having different kinds of accuracy and different kinds of IDs. So I had to redo a lot of my internal model. So when I started out, I would have been, arrogant technical guy and said I understood it and written a requirement. And I was wrong, right? I had to make a bunch of changes. So the question is, as you guys are looking at changing your requirements and your architectures, one of the things that you guys are missing, and I haven't been around the Army in the last 3 years, is the ability to look at a narrow problem and then build a prototype in 90 days to investigate something. And the way your acquisition really works is there's big long-term programs of records, and I understand they don't want to change where they're going, and then R&D programs get set up for 3 to 5 year programs, and they're just big, large programs. So the question is, are you guys looking at that acquisition effort of bringing in small little prototypes and essentially trying to answer questions to inform your requirement? And that's how they call that a trait. We used to call it in the 90s. Maybe it's not politically correct now. We used to call building tracer bullets. You would lay out a solution and put a bullet essentially through the requirement, and then you would iterate. Thank you.
I think the answer to that would be yes. And I don't want to steal Pete's thunder this afternoon because I think that's one of the things he's going to talk to you about and how the cross-functional team is going to operate going into the future. But that's going to be a huge part of what they're doing. My personal opinion is, your better innovators that are out there are people that are dealing with a real-world problem right now, and they're figuring out a way to make it better, to fix it, to do it, leap ahead. But a lot of times our innovators and our practitioners, we don't always, link together. And so I know that, like, one of the things he's going to talk to you about this afternoon is how to bring that loop and how to bring that closer together going forward. But yes, prototyping, experimenting, all that's part of it. So, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to take it from a little bit different perspective because I know Pete's going to talk about the larger network piece, and I'm going to throw my cyber hat on for a second, right? So remember what I sort of described previously with this IT box. So it was a broad requirement saying we've got this problem, 7, 8 pages, maybe. This is the problem that we're trying to solve in these various environments. So it wasn't, hey, I need 128 terabytes of storage and trying to write the gold-plated requirements of the past. The next phase of it was a requirements definitions package where you took one of those subsets, and I'll just use garrison infrastructure, where we have no defensive cyber capability at all today. All right, so now I'm going to provide a little bit more meat operationally. Here's what I want to try and get done. Based off of that, those prototypes that are going to show up in April are going to land in the Cyber Protection Brigade. And it really goes back to what Jim just sat there and said, the operators being the innovators with the right technical support to help make the right puts and takes that's coming out of the back end of that. Through prototyping, experimentation, discovery, it's going to be really a combination of all three. We'll be able to make an informed decision about what we really want to field sometime this summer. But then it's going to iterate. I mean, it's cyber, right? So it's going to iterate. And so literally you got to keep that entire team together through the life cycle of what it is we're trying to do. And we've said that life cycle is only 3 to 5 years. And at some point during that 3 to 5 year cycle, we're going to come back in, and refine the problem based off of what we've learned through real world operations, and that will lead us to another 3 to 5 year sprint. But inside that 3 to 5 year sprint, our development model is every 6 to 12 months, at a minimum, something new is spinning in, because that's how fast everything's evolving.
Well, speaking of sprints, we're close to done. I'll just tell you now, we're going to have a break for lunch, but these two gentlemen will be back with us, right, sitting at that table, mic'd up, probably turn the mics back on, and Q&A can continue. So we're going to break at this point for lunch and thank them. Let's give them a hand.